Our country needs to confront the Democratic Party's willingness to threaten our governing institutions themselves. Earlier this year, as the Senate disposed of the least fair, least thorough, and most rushed impeachment in modern history, I offered a broader warning. I said leaders in the opposite party increasingly argue that if our institutions don't produce the outcomes they like, our institutions themselves must be broken. No longer do disappointments for Democrats mean that Democrats need better arguments. Now disappointments for Democrats are claimed as proof that our country is fundamentally broken or that James Madison messed something up. So while we have far-left mobs attacking statues of our founding fathers from coast to coast, we have far-left politicians attacking the institutions those founders left us. Now step back and look at the landscape of fundamental changes that leading Democrats or their close allies are demanding. Amending the First Amendment to restrict its protections, ending the Electoral College, packing the Supreme Court with new justices, packing the Senate with new states, and to accomplish all this, destroying the Senate's distinguishing feature that makes radical change hard by design. We have an entire political movement that is telling us literally out loud that they've lost patience with playing by the rules and may well declare war on the rule book itself. A coalition of left-wing special interests are explicitly campaigning for, quote, 51 for 51. They want senators to vandalize the rules to pass legislation with a simple majority and then use that ill-gotten power to cement a presumed advantage by awarding the District of Columbia 2 Senate seats. They want to nuke the Senate to pack the Senate. This, Mr. President, is naked politics. No neutral principle could explain why all these special interests prioritize this cause, which most Americans oppose. No neutral principle explains why Democrats want the nation's 20th most populous city to get 2 senators all to itself, when retrocession to Maryland would satisfy their own slogans more cleanly. No neutral principle explains why House Democrats wasted floor time on a potentially unconstitutional show vote. Just days after Democrats used the filibuster power to block Senator Scott's police reform bill, even colleagues who recently defended this important tradition have now bowed to the pressure to flirt with ending it. On a similar note, Mr. President, you may remember that a kind of naked intimidation without modern precedent in modern memory took place a few months ago. The Democratic leader stood by the steps of the Supreme Court and directly threatened justices if they rule the wrong way in the June medical services case. This display aligned with a whole new tradition of Senate Democrats threatening judges. A year ago, several wrote justices saying, quote, "The court is not well, and perhaps the court can heal itself before the public demands it be restructured." In other words, nice judicial independence you've got there. It would be a shame if something happened to it. Right on cue, a number of left-wing groups are agitating to revive the discredited notion of court packing. Now, following the Democratic leader's display, the court ruled the way he wanted on that very case. They handed it down on Monday of this week. Our colleague took to the floor cracking jokes, giddy, he had gotten his way. But just moments later, the Democratic leader picked right up where he left off, impugning and pressuring one justice whose vote he disliked. So you see, Mr. President, the improper pressure and the accusations of illegitimacy will never end. No amount of rulings the Democrats like would be enough, because the fundamental respect for an independent judiciary is simply not there. This is about outcomes, not institutions, and there's no limit to how far the left, the goalposts, will move. Well, the subject's not going away, but for today, I'll leave it there. This weekend, July 4th, Americans will celebrate our founding. We'll celebrate the framers and the traditions and the institutions that they left us. We cannot let radicals tear down their likenesses or their legacies. We must preserve the gifts and the institutions we celebrate so our grandchildren and their grandchildren can celebrate them as well. Now, Mr. President, on an entirely different matter, the Senate continues to consider the National Defense Authorization Act. I understand we're close to a bipartisan structure for amendments, and if our Democratic colleagues will let us, I hope we can move forward today. All week, I've discussed how this 60th consecutive NDAA will help our nation protect its people, stand with our allies, and keep pace with our competitors. This legislation has global reach. But as all my colleagues know, the NDAA is also a profoundly local bill for communities in all 50 states. My home state is proud to support 3 Army installations and the men and women of the Kentucky Air and Army National Guard. Last fall, I hosted Defense Secretary Mark Esper in Kentucky to speak with the Fort Knox community. He called for a renewed commitment to supporting our all-volunteer force, including military spouses and their families. The NDAA advances that goal. It will authorize a new elementary school at Fort Knox. This construction, paired with progress toward a new middle school at Fort Campbell, will continue making Kentucky's installations a welcoming home for military families. This project comes on the heels of Fort Knox's selection for the new 5th Corps headquarters. This mission brings more than 600 additional soldiers to Kentucky in support of U.S. operations over in Europe. They'll join Fort Knox's already impressive list of significant commands, including the Army Recruiting, Cadet, and Human Resources commands. The 5th Corps will find a premier installation made even better by this NDAA. Our bill also authorizes the construction of a new headquarters for the Kentucky National Guard. The facility will consolidate the Guard's operation to a central location. Just recently, our citizen soldiers and airmen have stepped up to combat COVID-19. I'm glad this legislation will deliver for them. At the Bluegrass Army Depot, the NDAA will advance the disposal of legacy chemical weapons. Families in Madison County have lived for generations with these deadly agents practically in their backyards. For years, I've fought alongside them to support safe and responsible demilitarization. In just the first year of chemical destruction activities, the depot has already completed a campaign ahead of schedule. An entire type of munition has been completely deleted from the U.S. stockpile. Our legislation will help us safely consign more of these weapons to the ash heap of history. Now, I've also spoken this week about the growing boldness of our nation's adversaries and the evolving threats our service members face. The men and women of Fort Campbell, including the 101st Airborne, are among those our nations turn to first to handle serious challenges. Their recent deployments to Europe, Afghanistan, and to support the COVID-19 response in New York and New Jersey show their importance to our country. Pursuant to the National Defense Strategy, this NDAA will encourage new capabilities so elite fighting forces like the 101st are equipped for success under any circumstances. The Senate is grateful for the courageous service of our armed forces. The bipartisan legislation before us honors their sacrifices and authorizes the resources to carry out their missions its impact will not be felt just by our adversaries overseas, but by our service members and communities right here at home. So I'd like to once again thank Chairman Inhofe, Ranking Member Reed, and our colleagues on the Armed Services Committee for their serious and thoughtful work. Let's get this bill moving toward completion.